I was looking this morning at the financials for the day, and I was scared. I was scared. A lot going on in the financial markets. A lot going on with this coronavirus, and it brought me back to 2007, 2008. And in 2007, 2008, I was also really scared. And it's interesting because I'm not one that gives into a lot of fear. In fact, I've prided myself since the time I was pretty young about not being afraid. And I'm a psychologist, right? I mean, I'm somebody that's trained to help people master their anxieties, to work through things and so forth. So I don't like being afraid. I really don't like that. But I was looking at the screens this morning, and I was back in 2007, 2008. I had anticipated the subprime mortgage crisis. I remember being really anxious when the Dow was hitting its high back then. I was seeing the possibility of systemic collapse. And I was very wrapped up in the old ways I have of coping with these things. And as I was reflecting on that this morning, I realized that this is not so much about, 2020. It's not so much about 2007, 2008. This is really about 1980. Mm-hmm. And in 1980, I was in a hospital bed in Madison, Wisconsin, looking up at the ceiling, about to go in for my third surgery on my neck. I was 104 miles from home. I was in a room by myself I had a roommate, a little toddler roommate who was just crying through the night. On a pediatrics ward, I was 10 years old. And I thought I could die. I thought I could die, and I thought I couldn't take any more. I remember the words from a song that was in my grandfather's Magnus chord organ book. I found the words to the song "Suicide is Painless." That's the theme from MASH, and it was the first time I remember really being overwhelmed by fear. And I had this thought at that time that if I got overwhelmed by fear, it could kill me. And so at that moment, all that fear drained out of me, or I thought it drained out of me. I didn't feel it. And it was replaced with a lot of anger, or really sort of suppressed by anger. And what I just realized this morning is, as I was feeling the fear that I thought went back to 2007, 2008, is that this connected way back to 1980. It was tapping into things that had not been entirely resolved, even though I had been aware of them. I had done some work on them in my own therapy, but there was still some things there where I felt really alone in the little room with the white walls and the crying toddler. And so to make those connections, to understand that, was like eye-opening to me. And it's one of the things I really love about doing this work for Souls and Hearts. I mean, it's always stuff that comes up for me. There's always stuff that comes up in here for me. So, I have been in sessions with clients who are really anxious right now. This is the most anxious my clientele has been in general ever. As all kinds of travel restrictions are being imposed, as things are shutting down, as life is changing in ways that are unpredictable, as they scramble for ways to control. I'm also thinking about that. We are having unanticipated things happening in life, in our families, in my family right now. So this has been a difficult time. And So I wanted to talk today about coping with fear, and it connects into to some of our readings, I thought, as I was looking through them today. So I'm glad you're here, Dr. Gerry.
Hey, Dr. Peter.
Very glad you're here with me today. It's good to look at you and to be with you as we enter into some of these, these deep waters. And I'm glad that all of you are with us as well on this journey, on this pilgrimage inside with souls and hearts.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Peter. Thank you for sharing that story and the connection between, your fears of the market and then how that really brought you back to that childhood experience that was sounds like, very difficult, very lonely and full of fear. And it was a major turning point, I think, sounds like, for you.
Yeah, I mean, I had thought I had just sort of left it behind. I thought that because it hadn't troubled me. I rarely thought about those 3 surgeries, those 2 failed spinal fusions. And then the third one, which ultimately was successful, I recovered with very little sort of post-operative, problems.
That's a lot for a little guy to go through. And you mentioned like there being a toddler crying throughout the night right beside you. That must have
right. That was extremely stressful. And I and again, memories can be distorted in various ways, but I just remember the sense from the nursing staff was that there's nothing we can do, and
Wow.
He did cry himself out, but it was sort of a hopeless cry. And I felt like that toddler, and I felt guilty that I couldn't reach out to him, and I couldn't do anything to help him because I was so wrapped up in my own stuff.
Right.
And that ties into some of the concerns that I have now as a clinician. Am I going to be able to, as I kind of explore what I'm anxious about now, am I going to be able to take care of my family with all the unpredictable things that are going to be happening?
Can I ask you a question? There's just something that struck me. You said your fear was replaced by anger.
Yeah.
And could you say something about that? Because what was that anger and who was it directed to?
So the anger originally was directed at my first surgeon, because I found he was totally incompetent. Like, that's sort of my attitude.
When you were 10.
When I was 10. Yeah, I have this memory of being in the first hospital after the second surgery. I have this memory of him coming in. I'm alone with the surgeon. And the surgeon comes in and tells me that the wires in my fusion between my C1 and C2 vertebrae have broken again, and that the surgery was unsuccessful. Same surgery he had done the first time around. And I remember like this sinking feeling, and then I remember just rage. And I remember like throwing the water pitcher at him and saying all of the worst words I could think of as a 10-year-old. I didn't have a very great vocabulary as a 10-year-old, and I remember him being afraid.
Of you.
Of me. I remember him being afraid of me. And then I was able to and I didn't figure this out until about 2 years ago. But then I was able to feel like, oh, I'm not afraid. The surgeon is afraid. Like I was able to displace that fear, or to attribute the fear to the surgeon. And I was angry. So when I'm angry, I'm powerful, right? Wow. And when I'm angry, I can get things done. I've got agency. When I'm angry. These were all the associations that I was making as a little 11-year-old. In a hospital bed. So there was something really adaptive about that.
Yeah, I was just going to link that to like EMDR, which is a type of trauma treatment that you learned the answer to resolving problems of loneliness, problems of fear, problems of all this helplessness. You learned through anger, you could gain, like you said, agency and power.
Right.
Wow. So that became what you learned, which probably was interestingly effective.
It was very effective.
But probably later in life, discovering that doesn't work in all situations.
No, it's really kind of difficult because I didn't tolerate fear. Situations that would make other people afraid would make me angry. Right. In certain situations, like it's really adaptive. Like, stray dogs, sometimes would chase me while I was running. And I used to like just, and I still do. I'll go after the stray dog, and every dog I've had that's ever come after me has turned and run when I went after it, you know. And I've also I've done some forensic work where attorneys were cross-examining me and trying to destabilize me, and I could rise up and disarm them, you know, in various ways. So there's ways that it was adaptive, but when one of my kids who had just learned how to drive spun out on a road, you know, one of my sons spun out and was like totally afraid and like was able to feel all of that and experience all of that. Like this is again a number of years ago. I had a hard time understanding what he was experiencing because I was disconnected from my own fear. Right. So the capacity for empathy in that particular situation, you know, was limited for me, you know, and so I'm glad to be able to experience the fear when I have it now. Yeah. I mean, it is a gift to be able to connect with that.
You know, I'm curious because, you know, the show's Be With the Word, and we are looking at our Sunday readings, and we've got some really powerful ones. And I really think what you were just saying there about even that moment not being able to connect with your son's fear in a way that to be, you know, helpful to him. I think that's going to come. I'd like to come back to that in light of the readings.
Yeah. Well, we definitely want to connect with the readings because, you know, all these things, like when I experienced these were about life and death. Like all of these fears, the fear I had this morning when I was looking at that stock chart and the fears from 1980 or 2007, 2008, and then going back to, you know, 1980, it all connected back to things around life and death. And when we get really afraid, it connects back to basic things, usually around safety and security, you know, very much about at least perceived life and death situations. You know, because like in 1980, I had trouble with the anesthetic. I had a lot of trouble with the general anesthetic. I mean, that was a real problem for me. And so there was risk involved in that. And so we can tap into that stuff and not realize that we're tapping into it. So one of the things that I connected through all three readings was this theme of life and death.
Yeah.
If you go back to Ezekiel, right, which is our first reading, our Lord tells us through the prophet Ezekiel, you know, the Lord is telling Ezekiel to tell the Israelites, I will open your graves and have you rise from them. Implying that, you know, they're already dead. I will put my spirit in you that you may live.
Right.
You know, I have promised and I will do it, you know. So, and in the second reading, Paul to the Romans, I will give life to you. You know, you're dead because of sin, but I will give life to you. So as I was in this space, you know, dealing with fear today, I was thinking about life and death, and that's how I was connecting it. And then, of course, we have in the gospel, Lazarus, right? The story of Lazarus rising from the dead.
Can I mention something? And I don't know if this will connect well or not. It's just
it's okay.
It might not, and then we just sort of like shove it aside. But
no,
I can't help it because I am like a super geek, right? And actually, I don't know if it gets cut out or not sometimes in the video editing, but there's a Lord of the Rings picture behind me,
right?
And when I hear that, I picture the scene from the Two Towers, and it's the King Theoden. And he's pale, and he's got worm tongue, I think it is, like telling him what to do and say. And, you know, Gandalf, the wizard, comes in and, you know, has managed to trick them into letting him come in with his staff, right? But when you see Theoden, it's like he's dead.
It's like he's dead, yeah.
Yeah, and he is caught in this, and he's incapable of really being alive. Like, he's not fully alive, but he's incapable of taking action. He's incapable of understanding anything that's going on. He's incapable of reaching out to helping his own children or nieces or nephews or whatever it is.
Right.
And in other words, they're being hurt in a way, and he can't do it. Like, he's just blinded in a way.
He's caught up in his own internal stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And that powerful scene where Gandalf, you know, uses a staff, whatnot, and you can see the life come back into him.
Right.
And as soon as it does, he takes action, like realize, whoa, there's hordes of orcs attacking the kingdom, and this guy has actually been feeding me poison all this time. Right. And that's what kind of came to me. Like, I don't think that fits totally to your story, but I do kind of think, like, you know, you learn anger. It's not really the same, but like something impaired you from being able to actually be fully human with your son when he needed you.
Right.
Right. And it's only because you had to learn how to adapt in a way that was necessary at one time earlier in your life. It's not a criticism of you. It's just
no. It's like those parts of me don't know like what year it is. Like if I'm experiencing that, it's like it's 1980 all over again. Right. You know, so yeah. And you know what? It's really interesting how you describe it, like, because that's all of Ezekiel 37. If you go back to and read the rest of the chapter of Ezekiel, it's like Ezekiel has this vision in which our Lord commands him to preach to these dry bones strewn across the countryside. And as he preaches to them, you know, the bones come together, they knit together, and then the skeletons arise, and then the flesh comes on the bones. Like there's this very graphic representation of these dead, dry bones, like coming alive again, which is what I was thinking of when you were describing that scene with Theoden in the Two Towers, right? It was very much like, it's very much like coming alive again. Or, you know, in the second reading, again, we're talking about giving life. You know, St. Paul's talking about how our Lord gives us life again, right? So it very much is like that. There are people, you know, who feel pretty dead, pretty numb, pretty shut down, disconnected inside. You know, or they've lost themselves in anxiety, or they've lost themselves in dissociation, or they've lost themselves in their despair, right? There's lots of ways that we can lose ourselves and die in ways that aren't good.
So, you know, it makes me think, like, you know, in terms of, hey, our listeners and people that are here listening, and there are ways in which I think all of us have allowed parts of ourselves to just kind of wither or die or be, you know, numbed out or be disconnected. And it's for some reason. It's not just out of nowhere. It's because of usually past traumas and things. And yet it just, you know, we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to allow those dry bones to come alive again. We don't allow the Spirit in to be able to bring life.
Right. But and a lot of times it's so outside of our awareness, right? I mean, and so we're you know, and it goes back to that basic safety and security. You know, a lot of times people say, yeah, I don't ever think about my childhood. You know, as a depth psychologist, I do go back. You know, we do kind of take a look at what's happening there. You know, and,
but you did that. You made the connection to there's a current situation right now going on. Stirred up 2007, 2008 fears. Which then you were also able to say that was also fueled and affected by something early on. And then it leads me to think, okay, Dr. Peter here.
Yes.
Like, what did 10-year-old you need?
I'm sorry?
What did 10-year-old?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, because once you begin to ask and answer those questions, then you're in a really much better position to have those needs met, like if you know what they are, right? So the thing that was so frightening to me when I was 10 was just how alone I was. Right, how I was sort of disconnected because my parents couldn't be there the whole time. And back in 1980, hospital admissions or visitation privileges were very different than they are now. You know, there was some visitation hours, you know, and, you know, I was in this, I needed a really specialized surgery, especially since the first two surgeries had failed. So I couldn't be really close to home. And so, but as a 10-year-old, you don't understand all of those things. Right. Or you understand them only in the most intellectual way. Right. And, you know, my mom would have loved to have been there with me the whole time. My mom was a nurse. Right. So I was, you know, first. So I had never spent that much time away from home at 10 years old, 11 years old. You know, we hadn't done a lot of this, you know, camp away from home stuff or anything. This was the first time that I was really away from home.
Right.
So, so what I really needed was the sense that, that there was somebody that I could rely on, that was there, that was going to help me through this, because that didn't come out through the medical team, or the medical staff at all. So, you know, and I've noticed that in, you know, recent days where I've gotten myself very caught up in my own strength, in my own power, I'm going to figure it out on my own. You know, that's where I had, you know, go back to that deep sense of alienation. And it's not because God doesn't love me or because God isn't, you know, invested in me. It's because I've disconnected. I've decided that I'm going to rely on the old familiar ways of relying on myself. I have grown up very self-reliant, and it's been really
But
problematic.
self-reliance is just a way of adapting to
Yes.
feeling alone and not having any other recourse. So
Right.
I'm really curious now then, like say given right now, coronavirus, everything going on, right? Like for you, obviously you might be able to rely on your family, people that you know you're not, and friends to know you're not alone. So, and that's definitely, I'm assuming, is a good thing.
Yeah,
but I'm curious, how do you, allow God in to help that 10-year-old part of you now?
Well, see, that's the thing. It's when I notice that I'm skipping like my daily prayer routines, like I have little time that I set aside, 7 minutes in the morning. This is after my morning meditation. I try to do a holy hour in the morning. But if I don't do those prayers during the day and I decide, like I did this morning, to just give a quick update on the markets, I can get myself really wound up quick, right?
Yeah.
Because that all is set up to increase agitation and fear, right? There's nothing I'm reading on the internet when I'm doing that is fostering the spiritual life and letting me know that I'm a beloved child of God, right? I actually have to work against the world, that's out there on the internet, really, to be able to really connect with that. And when I do that, Gerry, I feel very much a sense of peace.
Yeah.
But I forget, it's like things kick in sort of automatically. And it's a lot of behaviors that I was doing back in 2007, 2008. Same websites, the same financial websites, the same looking at, charts the way I did when I was an extremely short-term derivatives trader. I got out of that because it was terrible for family life too. My wife hated the fact that I traded, these derivatives. She didn't like how.
But how do you? So when you go to prayer, when you prioritize that prayer time,
yes,
that allows you to connect with God in a way that tells you you're not alone.
Right, because I actually am in a period of a fair number of consolation, so I can actually feel it right now. But what happens is that like a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, I can forget. I can lose track of it. So a lot of it for me is staying with my plan of life, right? And staying with those regularly scheduled prayer times. And then I don't feel so alone. Like even just talking about it right now, I'm feeling so much better, right, than I was earlier today. So.
Can I, because I'm concerned about time, but I love this conversation. I think we need to get to Lazarus. And,
yes,
and what was hitting me, just one thing that is hitting me, and it's not a perfect parallel at all, but you and me, we're just so different, right? Like the ways, like I can't even imagine being 10 years old and like scaring my doctor, right? Like that wouldn't have been me at all. And I would have adapted in different ways, right? But I'm thinking of Mary and Martha in this story and how they both responded in different ways to Jesus's absence, because you just described a situation when you were 10 where perhaps you didn't really feel close to God in that moment.
Right, not then.
In previous sessions, I've talked about, a little bit that too. And so, what did Mary do? What did Martha do? And how are their responses different? And so on in this gospel reading.
Even though the words were the same, right? Because they both had the same words at one point. They both said almost the same line. They said something about like, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. They both say that line.
Oh, they do? Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, you're right. One stayed at home. One went out to meet him, right?
Yeah.
Very different ways.
I feel like I'll have to look at the passage again, and correct me, please.
Right.
But I had the feel, it was just a gut feeling that Martha kind of went to Jesus going, so glad you're here. It's so sad. And she had resigned. And Mary, it felt like Mary was like, she does it not in a horrible, she wouldn't, not like you did with the doctor.
Right.
But she kind of
challenges him.
It feels like she's going, where the hell were you? If you had been here, buddy, this could have been prevented.
Right.
The tone feels different.
Well, you know what? When Mary Magdalene was, here's the most poignant line. When Jesus saw her weeping, right? Because Mary was weeping. Martha wasn't weeping. but Mary was weeping when she interacted with Jesus. So when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became perturbed and deeply troubled. Like, here you see his humanity. Like, he was resonating with that distress.
Right.
You know, it wasn't because he was losing his own composure, but he was just really resonating with that distress.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, and caring about them. You know, like,
Yeah.
And then he wept. You know, after that, like you know, he was grieving for them, you know, and for their loss, even though he knew that in 10 minutes Lazarus would be up and moving around.
Right. Yeah, that line, that one line, Jesus wept, is so powerful, of course, and it's a sign of his great love. And he's seeing both of his sisters respond, or both of Lazarus' sisters respond in different ways, and yet he, and I think he's moved by both.
Yeah, he's moved by both, right?
And he's moved by what has happened to his friend, and to his friend Lazarus,
right?
So he has real, genuine, I think, human emotion that is expressed here, even despite the fact that he knows.
And you could see them saying, like, "Why didn't you come? Why did it play out this way? Why did Lazarus have to die?" Like, and it says in there that other people said, "Well, he healed a man born blind. Why couldn't he have done anything here?"
So,
and he knew that he, because he said it earlier, like, let's go, just so that the glory of God can be revealed. Right? He knew that this was an opportunity to reveal the glory of God, but he still wept,
right,
because of the intensity of the emotion that people were seeing, even though they weren't understanding it all.
Think about it. Like, so last week I shared a little bit of my story. Why did that happen to me? You shared today about being 10 and needing these three next. Why did you need those next? Why did you have to go through that? Yeah. Why are we going through coronavirus crap? Why is all these things? Why do these things happen to us? Right? That seem like Jesus or God or whoever could just come in and just like not have any of it happen. And I think that's a really human response, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. For us to ask why, or for us to enact it. If we're not asking it, sometimes people just enact it. Like, I think these, when you see the footage of like two people grappling over a case of water at a Costco, and neither of them is thirsty.
Or toilet paper here.
Or toilet paper, yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of images on the internet of like, it's because they are translating this into life or death situations. They're fighting for survival,
right?
Misinterpreting situations, and probably going back to things that happened to them much earlier in life.
But what strikes me though, because I don't want to lose this point, because I think it's fitting together at multiple weeks of our talks, and it's hitting me, is Jesus wept.
Yes.
And it isn't only to say Jesus had emotion, yes, of course, but it is to say that is the model for understanding our suffering, is that he is with them.
Right.
He's weeping along with them. And if we have eyes to see it, he was weeping with me as a child. And if we have eyes to see it, he was weeping with you and your suffering in that hospital room or that bed. And he's weeping, and he's with us, whatever may come right now with this virus or whatever else is going on in the world or the stock markets. He's there.
Yes.
And we don't understand why he doesn't just change it. I think we can get there philosophically, and there's answers to that question that don't maybe make us feel a lot better, right? They're logical, but the reality that's more important is he loves us and he's with us.
Yes. And we need to hold on to that. And maybe it's a dry intellectual concept, at first. But if I can hold on to that dry intellectual concept when I'm caught up with fear, and looking at 5-minute price tick charts, and I say, oh, it's time to pray, and I go and do that prayer, I can reconnect with it.
Yeah.
Because he can't just invade me, right? He's not going to just invade me. He does need me to cooperate with it.
But here's my thought. That doesn't work for me. If I go to a dry intellectual thought in the face of my fears, it might work for you. That won't work for me. That sends me into lots of thinking of all kinds of things. I actually need, like the people that are fighting over the water or the toilet paper, I need to stop and go, I'm not actually thirsty right now. I'm not actually dying. Chill out, body. So my body has to actually like recognize I'm not in danger. Because if I am in danger, I do need to do something.
Right.
But I have to relax my body. And then I need to hear God. I need to connect with God first. I need to have an emotional connection with God or others. And that helps soothe me, comfort me, be seen, be known, all that.
Right.
And then I can have my rational discussion of whatever it is.
See, and I work a little differently. If I can remember, if I can just hold on to a line, you know, then that can motivate me to go into prayer, you know, where I can find that, you know. And so yeah, I mean, it works differently for different people. And that's one of the things that because we're coming up towards the end, we got to start talking about like how we're going to, you know, talk about like what's helpful, you know.
Yeah.
I find that, you know, going back to Exodus, right, and the idea of the manna, right, and it lasted for one day. Every day they got the manna, except the day before the Sabbath they got the double portion, right? They didn't get a complete, well-stocked, you know, rolling grocery store that went through the desert with them, where they knew that they had everything for the whole journey, the whole 40 years. They got manna for the day. Right. So I asked the question, do I have what I need right now? And the answer is always yes. I'm always, you know, if I get nervous, it's about something in the future, usually, you know, that I fear I'm going to be missing or lacking. And so that's what when if you are getting wrapped up in some of this, you know, if you have some similar fears, or if you have particular things that are going on in your life that may not even have to directly do with the coronavirus or the, you know, socioeconomic situation, you know, complex systems imploding or whatever, you know, it could be a health concern. It could be other things. You know, do I have what I need right now?
Yeah.
Do I have what I need right now? You know, and really explore that question. And then what is it that I think I need that I don't have, you know, because there's real great truth that can come from that. And then take that to our Lord, take that to our Lady. So sort of the recommendation at the end of this.
I love that. Am I safe now?
Am I safe now? Yeah. Am I safe now? Do I have what I need? You know, and if you practice that, if you actually can be small, because before I could touch base with this experience as a 10-year-old, it was tougher for me to be small. This whole idea of being like a little child, man, it didn't make any sense to me. It seemed like it was counterproductive to my survival, really, you know, because I had learned to survive in the world by being strong, you know, being tough enough, you know, to intimidate other people in some cases, you know, like, that's a big deal. That's one of the reasons why St. Teresa of Lisieux never made any sense to me. The little flower didn't make any sense to me until about 2-3 years ago. And now I just absolutely love her stuff, you know, because it just makes so much sense about like that some of the language still is a little difficult, but yeah, just being small, because that's our role. Can I be a sheep, you know, cared for by the shepherd, right? So.
Nice. Beautiful. Thank you.
Well, thank you, dear Gerry. It was a pleasure to do this with you, and thank you, all of our audience, for being here and walking with us through this. You're the whole reason why we do. Well, you're the whole reason why we do this. And got some interesting things coming up. I am super excited about your course, Dr. Gerry. You've got that coming up. Tell us about it.
You can take a course. It's called Restoring Your Marriage After the Discovery of a Pornography Issue. And so it is a unique course because not only does it help a person work toward recovery and overcoming an addiction, it does it within the context of relationship. So it also takes into account the other person, like maybe it's the wife, and what she is going through. And it provides some really good resources and exercises and things for her to do. And it has exercises and resources for the couple to do together. Heal together.
Yeah.
There's nothing else like it. You get, you know, in this course, you're getting tons of marital and mental health and addiction resources that you could only get from seeing a professional who had years of experience working on these things. So it's a rare thing, and I really think it will help. It's really good. I've seen modules of it. It's like 24, 25 modules, and then there's like worksheets, you know, that go with them. So it's a really comprehensive thing, and I think it's going to be a huge
a huge benefit to people to take that on their own if that is an issue in the marriage, or to use it as an adjunct for their therapy work, maybe their marital therapy work or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
we're really excited about that launching. We've got a whole new web redesign that's underway, and hopefully is going to be done by the time this airs, and blogs coming up, and so all kinds of exciting things.
Well, A Catholic's Guide to Finding a Therapist is a free resource.
Yep.
There's the helping loved one in distress, and there's how to help yourself when you are experiencing distress as well. So we have a lot of free resources.
Those are free resources. And then Fly on the Wall has got its new episode on the clergy sex abuse scandal, and the take from, and we have 2 new guests on that one. Two of our brothers in arms joined us for that particular one. So there's 8 of us together, and really spirited conversation there too. So check that out, soulsandhearts.com. We've got lots of really fascinating things.
Lots of good stuff coming your way. Yeah. So we're just thrilled to have you listening, and we love the feedback that we're getting from people about how this is impacting either your work or your family life or your relationships. So please, if you've been impacted by our show in any way, obviously subscribe, share, like, that stuff, but also give us some feedback. Let us know how you're liking the show. We're opening up a little bit more about ourselves. Tell us if you like that or not. Feel free to share any of your journey too. We'd love to hear how you relate to our stories and what resonates with you and what your takeaways are. So thanks for having me with us. All right, till next time.